On this Thursday, April 6th, a lot to get to this week after an election week here in Missouri and in Illinois. We're going to talk about the transition taking place at City Hall. Also, Mayor Jones says this new Board of Aldermen reflects the most diverse board the city has ever seen after the city elected 5 black members, 6 white members, 1 Latina, and 1 Asian American. We're going to get to a lot of that in just a minute. But first, let's check in with Megan Green, the president of the board, after a big transition and turnover at City Hall in St. Louis.
Aldergeddon is over.
14 candidates declared victory Tuesday night after a bruising campaign season sent 9 incumbents home. 10 incumbents will keep their seats and expand into new, larger wards. Alderman Joe Vollmer won more votes than 24 of the 26 other candidates on the ballot across the city.
It's a whole new world when you're going down to 14 aldermen. So I guess around here they're trying to vote for continuity, in my case. But there's other places, I guess, where they wanted a little more radical change.
4 new faces will take their seats at City Hall in 2 weeks, including Daniela Velasquez.
I think the city wants progress. We want to get things done, and I think more than that, voters are asking for collaboration.
Oh, bless her heart.
Mayor Tashara Jones and president of the board, Megan Green, teamed up to try and topple Alderwoman Sharon Tyus, the longest-serving member of the board, but their efforts fell flat. Tyus won by more than 200 votes against challenger Tashara Earl.
It was a close race, but she didn't quite get over the finish line. I am still confident and comfortable with the majority that we do have the board.
With key wins in 3 other wards, Green sees momentum building in her corner.
The progressive movement in this city has continued to pick up steam each election cycle.
There should be not one mode saying we won or we lost. If we don't do this together, we're going nowhere.
I think the not sexy but important thing are things like city services.
When I was out knocking on doors all through this thing, and I found out more what people wanted. Basically, it is city services, their main concern that I found out.
Our focus has to be, number one, re-envisioning what public safety looks like for this city. You're also going to see more efforts to support renters in our community. Almost half of folks in the city are renters right now.
18 current members of the Board of Aldermen are leaving, either retiring or losing their elections, but 4 new members-elect, are joining the board. One of them joins me now. Alicia Saunier is on the record. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on your win.
Thank you.
You're one of just a handful of candidates to enjoy support from both Megan Green and Mayor Jones. What did they want from you in exchange for their political support?
They didn't really want anything from me, to be honest with you. I come from the Board of Education, so in my case, I've had the joy of working with them and doing projects with them before. I was also, the political director for Megan's President Board of Aldermen race. They've seen me advocate for policies. They've seen me advocate for children and families, and really what they wanted from me was to win and make a commitment to stay committed to the people.
A lot of people are looking to see what direction this new board might take. A smaller board, twice the size and twice as many constituents in each ward from now on. A lot of people have talked about just city services, but you laid out a number of different ideas as you campaigned for this position, including giving all city workers a raise. Does that include police?
Yes, city workers are a part of that, so absolutely. And I know that they just completed negotiations and did receive a raise.
You want to go higher?
Well, so when we started campaigning, it was before that happened, so I didn't have any of that information. Obviously, all of those negotiations are between the mayor and personnel and the police, so you wouldn't be aware of that. I think we've got to make sure that there's a minimum set, and we still have city workers that are standing in line for utility assistance, that are having to go to food, toy drives around Christmas. So I want us to focus on the city workers that are making, wages under poverty and leaving them struggling for expenses first.
And certainly there are members of the board and other city advocates who suggest that just by raising wages, you'll attract more workers to all those unfilled jobs. The labor market has a lot of unfilled openings now. You also called for ending cash bond. I understand the economic justice arguments there, that a rich, dangerous person shouldn't be able to buy their way out onto the streets while a poor, innocent person is trapped in jail and without a way to pay their way out. But setting that aside for a second, how does the city accomplish that in a red state where cash bond is enshrined in state law? How do you do that?
I think there's a lot of different ways and mechanisms to get there. Of course, those conversations will have to be with the prosecutor's office and will have to be a part of our overall budget analysis. I just think first and foremost, as a city and as leaders, we have to commit to the fact that there shouldn't be a price on freedom. And so whatever we have to do to make sure that that is not what's keeping folks in jail and keeping people away from their family, and then being honest about what that produces. If you are in jail, you're unable to call your boss, you're going to miss time away from work, you may be missing time away from classes. And so, there's multiple mechanisms to get there. And I think just staying grounded in the principle and the idea that I believe that there should not be a price for freedom is first and foremost in that.
It sounds like you're suggesting that some sort of collaboration or communication between the board and the prosecutor's office, the circuit attorney's office, could accomplish this with or without a statutory change in Jefferson City. Do I read that correctly?
That would be my hope.
What level of interest would you have in bringing Kim Gardner before the board, whether it's on some committee level or otherwise? Usually this happens during the budget process, but do you think the city deserves to hear more in terms of answers from the circuit attorney on how her office has operated recently?
I think her office is an independent branch, and a lot of this, it has to be up to her and up to her autonomy, and I want to make sure I'm giving her the respect that she should get as the prosecutor's office. But we do, as all elected officials, serve the same people, and so in whatever way she's interested in coming, if she wants to come to a town hall that I might host, if she wants to come to a Board of Aldermen meeting, I root for that. In whatever way she wants to respond, I'm an advocate for that.
Your campaign website also says you want to eradicate poverty, and I don't know many people that enjoy poverty, but you've pitched this idea of universal guaranteed income. The city has that pilot program now where roughly 440 families in the city who earn $37,000 or less, somewhere in that ballpark, they get $500 a month for a period of 18 months. The price tag on a program that size is $5 million. If the city was to pay everybody in the city $500 that was at poverty level, that would be $350 million a year. We all know the pandemic money is running out soon-ish. How do you do all this, and where does the money come from?
It's going to take a multifaceted approach, and so it won't be a universal basic income alone that lets it happen. One of the things I talk about often is the relationship between crime and poverty. So I think one of the things we have to do is really assess the cost of what it costs you when we have poverty. It costs you to replace stolen vehicles. It costs you to replace total vehicles. It costs you to replace the things that go missing. And so even though a universal basic income, funding it at the full level for everyone is expensive, but we don't have to do it all at once. Just like the pilot takes a section of our population, and it's actually using families that are within St. Louis public schools. So I'm very happy about that as a previous Board of Education member. But I think that's sort of a model. Get some folks in it, pilot it for a couple of months, connect them to wraparound services, get those folks in a position where they have jobs and are able to make their own sources, and then transition other people in.
Is the idea that if there's no poverty, there would be no crime?
I think the idea is that if there is no poverty, there are people that are not in a situation of generational crime, and that there are people who have other options where they're not having to just resort to crime as a survival mechanism. It'll
be interesting to see how that unfolds with this change in the board. There's going to be some different voices there, and some of the voices that had opposed the guaranteed basic income are no longer there. Joe Vaccaro, one of them, who lost his election on Tuesday night. Quickly, you said that development projects in the city that receive public benefits should provide, let me say that again, that receive public subsidies should provide public benefit. That was for what part of your campaign platform. Aren't good paying jobs a public benefit?
They can be, but again, that takes up to the city to set that standard. We've certainly had development projects where there haven't been good wages paid, where there's been encouragement to not have unions. So that can certainly be a part of the conversation, but what I'm really advocating for is that when we're having these development deals, and it is a business agreement, that is something that's in the interest of the company, but is also in the interest of the people of St. Louis.
So you want to see X number or minimum number of jobs brought to the city, or something else, a labor peace agreement?
I want to, talk about each piece on a basis. There are some pieces that the project within itself is a service to the community. In the 7th Ward, we have developers that solely work on meeting the gap that the federal government doesn't meet when they're doing affordable housing projects. That's a public good. But certainly if you're a project where it's more of a luxury service, you may need to look into some kind of cash payment or invest into affordable housing fund in order for that project to serve some kind of public good.
At legislative bodies, we've all heard of the Blue Ribbon Commission. You've got something different, a red tape commission. Not a blue ribbon, but a red tape. Where is the red tape in city government, and how do you cut it out?
So red tape. In the 7th Ward, we have a booming economy that is led mostly by small, local-owned businesses of folks who live right within our ward and certainly right here within St. Louis. And when I've been talking to these business owners, they tell me that one of my challenges is whether or not I have a staff of 50 or a staff of 5, whether or not I have a revenue of 50 million or 5 million, the processes that I have to go through are the same. So what I'm advocating for with this Red Tape Commission is we bring together a group of small business owners or smaller level developers, and we have a conversation about how do we make it so that you are able to navigate the processes and criteria that we have in place without having so much red tape and bureaucracy.
Bureaucratic bloat or obstacles. It's a tongue twister. All right,
Yeah.
Alicia Saunier, it sounds to me like there's some interesting reporting to do along those lines. We look forward to hearing from you more in the future. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
In other news today, Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft announced his plans to run for governor earlier today. We asked Ashcroft about his plans to run for governor on this very program 3 or 4 weeks ago, but at the time he said he wasn't quite ready to announce just yet. Then, the week after, Republican State Senator Bill Eigel joined us here on the record and started teeing off on Ashcroft, saying that he had committed, quote, several errors on the job. Eigel apparently angling to try and outflank Ashcroft to his right in that primary, should he actually run. Eigel is right now only considering jumping into the race against Ashcroft and Lieutenant Governor Mike Kehoe, who are both announced for governor. And Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker visited the campus of Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville earlier today to promote increases in MAP grant funding. The Pritzker administration says right now any student in Illinois who wants a MAP grant and qualifies for one can get one. The funding is there. Pritzker also reacted to election results just north of the Illinois border in Wisconsin on Tuesday night, where he recently donated $20,000 from his own personal wealth to try and boost a Democratic candidate running for that state's Supreme Court. We asked him why.
First of all, the Wisconsin Supreme Court race was a critically important race. There were election deniers that have been running for offices all over Wisconsin. You know, it's a swing state. It's an important state in the general election in next year's presidential election. There were moves to invalidate electors in Wisconsin 3 years ago, sorry. And so having a Supreme Court made up of rational, non-extremist people who will simply evaluate the law and do the right thing, very, very important to all of us across the nation. In addition to that, it happens that one of the candidates was a severely anti-choice candidate, somebody who wanted to abide by an 1800s law in Wisconsin that should have been, frankly, not part of the discussion, but that would have literally made women second-class citizens in the state of Wisconsin. And one of the candidates was pro-choice and wanted to make sure that we were upholding the equal rights of women in Wisconsin. So, to me, that's an important race. I've supported Democrats all across the country. She was a Democrat, and I was glad to be one of the leading supporters of her race. And she won, by the way, in literally an overwhelming victory of 11 points.
Political analyst Anita Mannion is here now to react to Governor Pritzker's donation, the win in Wisconsin there. Wisconsin is not Missouri. Kansas is not Missouri, but they're states in the Midwest where voters have recently, after the Roe decision, the Dobbs decision, they've changed some of their elections right now. How closely should Missouri Republicans be looking at results like that as they head into 2024 with all these statewide races on the ballot?
I definitely think they're very aware of this. I think it's part of the reason that we're talking about the ballot initiative process right now, which we can talk about what happened with that last year. But yeah, I think it's something to worry about. Now, when we talk about statewide races in Missouri, part of the Democrats' problem is where is their bench? Who are the candidates? Because abortion is an important issue, and it's more motivating when something's taken away. And so that could bode well for Missouri. But it is more effective if it's literally on the ballot rather than just having candidates talk about it.
And we're seeing already Mike Kehoe in the race, Jay Ashcroft joining the race for governor right now. There are other races, of course, but still so far no Democrats that we've heard of that have made a splash in those big ticket races just yet.
I think Crystal Wade has said that she might have some interest, but yeah, we don't know who's going to run on the Democratic side, and there's clearly a lot of interested folks on the Republican side.
We also mentioned this phenomenon when you were here with us on Tuesday night, breaking down those election results, that there's this renewed interest in local school board races and library board races all across Illinois and in other parts of the country. Governor Pritzker recently commented on this during his trip to the Metro East today. Some of these races are in our area, where the Democratic Party sent an influx of cash to boost candidates against what they called extremists. So we asked Governor Pritzker, why does the state party, which often focuses on races for Congress, why are they so focused on these local races at the granular level? Take a listen.
I care about the entire state of Illinois. I care about our schools, and I care about truth. And there were extremist candidates running for school board, advanced by anti-LGBT, anti-Muslim, people who wanted to ban books. Those organizations were, quietly advancing these candidates, and it was important to me to call out who they are so voters can make a choice. So they're not, getting this sort of sneaky endeavor, secret endeavor to push these folks into office, and then you don't find out who they are until after they're in there. So that was, to me, an important endeavor. It's not a partisan endeavor. It was an effort genuinely to just, make people aware who's running in their local school board races. And frankly, the extremists lost in big numbers, which I'm very pleased about last Tuesday.
Anita, you've noted before there was that old line that used to exist that all politics is local. Now it's more that all politics is national. Do you see this as just an extension of that?
Yeah, school board elections and now libraries definitely have been nationalized. I think a lot of this really ramped up during the COVID pandemic. But when we just previously were talking about abortion, and that's a cultural war issue that used to be a winning issue for Republicans and now increasingly is for Democrats. And now I think that Republicans are seizing on this school board issue and parents' rights, LGBTQ issues related to schools as a cultural war issue that they think is winning for them.
It seems to be almost making the issues about, when big name, high profile politicians make the issues about those lower level, starter, entry level government jobs, it's almost sort of a nifty recruiting tactic to build a bench, because all of a sudden you have a lot of people coming forward to say, I'll run for this job. Back in the day, if you wanted a politician to start, you'd say start small, run for a small office. Now there's more just natural interest.
Yeah, previously school board elections are for folks who want to serve their community. They're generally unpaid. It's basically a volunteer service you do because you want to help your community be stronger. But now it is politicized, it's partisan. We saw, we talked about J.B. Pritzker getting involved, but here in the Wentzville and Francis Howell districts, we saw the St. Charles County Republicans making contributions. So it is just being politicized. And I guess we have to wonder to what ends, what effect is this going to have on schools?
Certainly, and schools are not the only ones. They're not the only ones involved in the politicization of this polarized moment that we're in. The justice system and prosecutors and courts are increasingly in the center of that tempest as well. In fact, on Tuesday this week, a story all of you probably saw right now, a blemish on the highest office in the country for 247 years. None of the presidents to ever hold the title of president had been brought before a court to face criminal charges. We have some video to show you about some of the AP images at Mar-a-Lago and in Manhattan earlier this week. You've heard the phrase, the cover-up is worse than the crime. In this case, it was the alleged crime. The alleged crime is the cover-up of another cover-up, if you follow there. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg charged former President Donald Trump with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in a conspiracy to conceal hush money payments made to at least two women to keep their stories out of the press and out of public view before the 2016 election. I note that because there is an inherent political element to this. Mr. Trump never disclosed those payments or reported them in campaign finance documents, and that omission is what prosecutors allege makes it a crime taken together that might elevate all of this from what could have been a misdemeanor up to a felony. Take a listen.
Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree.
There is no case. There's no case. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about.
If this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal.
The criminal is the district attorney because he illegally leaked massive amounts of grand jury information for which he should be prosecuted.
At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable.
That's the district attorney there making his case. Anita, this is obviously a legal case that will take place in a court of law, but there's also the court of public opinion and the court of politics that's happening on a separate track at the same time. We'll set the legal analysis aside for a moment and let that just play out. What did you make of the number of politicians who jumped into this even before the indictment was unsealed with their opinions for or against?
I think we mainly heard from politicians on the Republican side jumping in. I think the Democrats are kind of trying to keep quiet about this because they don't want to play into this idea that it's been politicized. But we are hearing from Republicans, as you said, before we even saw the indictment, and I think it's because of this case. I think there are other cases that might also have indictments, but this seems to be the weakest one. And I think in some people's mind, it almost goes back to that Bill Clinton impeachment, where Americans tend to think, well, he's doing this to cover up an affair. And so really, are we getting into his personal life, or is this a political prosecution, or is this a legitimate crime we need to go after?
And the affairs are now well-known, established parts of the record that we've had for years.
Right.
So it's easy to think, oh, we already knew all of that.
Right.
But voters didn't know that when they walked into the ballot box in November of 2016.
Sure.
It wasn't for a year and a half, 2 years later, roughly, that all of a sudden these details started to emerge. That seems to be something that changed the dynamics of that election. It certainly could have had that effect. Many people would say suppressing some of the embarrassing information about Hunter Biden's laptop had a similar effect in 2020. How does all of that play into 2024? Are there landmines out there for other candidates running for office at the federal or state levels, Republicans who might have to answer questions about this ongoing criminal case? How are they going to navigate that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the next court date is set for January of 2024. So this is certainly, I think we can expect ongoing legal battles, whether they're criminal or civil, that Donald Trump be entrenched in next year come election time. And you know, as with so many things Donald Trump related, we see some lawmakers who, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are more than eager to come out and state their viewpoint, but a lot of others who I haven't heard about that. I didn't read the article. I haven't seen that tweet. And so I think if we see more indictments pile up or more evidence come out in this case that we don't already know, that's when you can see people maybe start to change their colors.
There's a state race that a lot of people will be watching. That is the race for the U.S. Senate in Missouri. Josh Hawley is running for re-election. Lucas Kunce is one Democrat who's already jumped into that race there. How much of an issue could this Trump prosecution be in that Senate race? Do you see that being? Because we see. I'll add this context. Members of Congress already, some Republicans, are using their power on Capitol Hill, their subpoena power and their investigatory power, to try and get at this district attorney in Manhattan, to try to undermine him or try to weaken his position or just to investigate him, turn up the public heat on him. Do you see that having a spillover effect in a Senate race here?
You know, I'm not certain how much it'll affect that race. I feel like Hawley supporters are very aligned with Trump supporters. If we had a Venn diagram, I think there'd be a big overlap. And so I don't know that he has to play a lot into it. I think one part of how this plays into politics is, of course, Trump likes to be in that sort of combative stance. I think it's part of where he feels comfortable, right? So I'm persecuted, and it's because I'm standing up for you. They want to persecute you, but I'm standing in the way. And, you know, he said that in his speech the other night. And he doesn't just use that to bolster his support, he uses it to fundraise. And so we've seen in the last week or two, they're saying he's raised $8 million since the indictment's been announced. So I think that it'll be part of the fundraising ploy. And so Hawley could maybe piggyback on that because he's been very adept at using January 6th and other things to fundraise as well.
Even before the indictment came out, Senator Hawley tweeted, and we presume, it was right around the same time this news was coming out, so we presume that he was referring to this indictment, but he said, "They will regret this." That was the entire tweet. Sort of an ominous tone there, but it sounds like he was suggesting that okay, tit for tat, if Democrats want to go down this road, well, this can happen again. We saw that play out in the Senate over a very different issue about the filibuster. Is that where this appears to be headed, where all of a sudden there are just, if there's one appearance of a political prosecution, there's going to be more to follow?
Well, I think we already know that the House has very explicitly stated they're going to have a litany of investigations into the Biden administration, his family, all kinds of other things. So I think that we'll really see that ramp up once election season heats up, and so that'll be part of it. But as far as the tit for tat too, I think, again, going back to the Clinton case, which is somewhat, has some notes that are the same, there was a public backlash because the public saw the Republicans as being partisan and taking a personal issue and prosecuting it. And so perhaps that's what Hawley anticipates happening here as well.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that too, because do you see any trend that a silent majority of Americans are walking away, withdrawing from this just increasingly hostile political infighting? Is there any evidence that the general thinking of the general public is just saying, like, all right, I've had enough of this?
I think we saw some of that in 2022 when people said, what they were tired of the drama on both sides. Sometimes maybe a larger portion that might be the Trump fatigue because he's particularly good at drawing attention. But when they asked some candidates who were overperforming some sort of moderate Democrats, and they said, oh, I'm running as normal. Someone you don't have to think about every day. Someone who just goes in and does their job and doesn't mudsling or make everything controversial. So I think there are a lot of Americans who just sort of want that. We want government to be in the background.
Maybe the Romney-Biden crossover voter there, somewhere in that lane.
Yeah, I can see that.
All right, so we're just kind of recapping a lot of different things here, looking at federal elections, state elections. We heard from Governor Pritzker today, Jay Ashcroft now running. How do you handicap that race at all? We haven't heard much from Mike Kehoe. He's been kind of just running quietly in his position as lieutenant governor. Jay Ashcroft probably has more name ID, and Bill Eigel is thinking about jumping into this race.
Yeah, I agree with you that Ashcroft has more name ID. Part of it we talked on Tuesday about family legacies in Missouri. He's certainly part of that. He's been in office for a long time, and I think he's really been ramping up his public appearances in the last year or so. We even saw him testify about, trans youth in the state legislature. So certainly I think that he is taking a public role, taking stances. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up. It'll definitely be a competitive primary.
Yeah, you mentioned Crystal Quaid earlier. She's been rumored a potential Democratic candidate. She released a statement. I'm reading it here from an email. She says, quote, from the time he was defeated for state senate a decade ago, she's raising former defeat there, it's been clear Jay Ashcroft feels holding office is his birthright based on his father's accomplishments instead of a sacred duty to serve the citizens of Missouri. And she goes on to say the state voters deserve a governor who is dedicated to them, not an extremist who thinks he's entitled to the people's mansion because of his last name.
So
does that sound like a floor leader, or does that sound like a candidate?
I think it sounds like a candidate. What do you think?
Crystal Quaid, yeah, Crystal Quaid from...
Pretty pointed, and I think most people do see at this point Jay Ashcroft is the front runner, so that would be why he's the target there.
So before even declaring, we could be seeing the early outlines of what might transpire to be a general election. All right, Anita, we appreciate you very much giving us so much of your time and insights this week. Thank you for joining us. Next week on The Record, we plan to have Congresswoman Nikki Budzinski at the roughly 100-day mark after taking the oath of office on Capitol Hill early in Congress. We're going to try to see, is there any hope left for bipartisanship reaching across the aisle? Well, her political future might just rest on that very theory. A lot of Republicans in that swing district, or at least what used to be a swing district, will have her on next week at the same time. Until then, we're off the record.